Okay, so I'm gonna break down pretty much how this all became with Steve Darnell and TV show and how it all became. It really, I got to take it back to probably 1979. My dad was an iron worker right here in Las Vegas. There was a steel company here in all the way back in the 60s where my dad worked at, right down here, which was called Steel Engineers. My dad went from Steel Engineers to Nevada Rebar. There was about 3 other steel companies he worked for as a laborer, a shear operator, an iron worker. I mean, lots of stuff. And probably I would say in the mid to late 70s, my dad started his own steel business, which was Economy Steel. Now, I grew up in that world. I mean, that was back in the day where you could get up in the morning and go to work with your dad. Every summer, my dad had me, and he, it's not like we had babysitters and stuff like that. So basically, I just went to work with my dad every day. He started out with just a pickup truck and a pair of pliers. And he had a little tiny shop that he did a lot of wrought iron work. So he had a welding business that basically built wrought iron fences, spiral staircases, anything out of iron basically back then, he was doing. At that same time, he kind of got into the rebar business a little bit. So there was half the yard was structural, the other half of the yard was rebar. And I remember back in those days, we didn't even have a forklift. Every time a load of rebar came in, which was 20 foot, number 4 rebar, let's just say, there's usually about 150 pieces in a bundle of number 4 rebar, which comes out to a 1-ton bundle of steel. He'd have to bar that off the truck. And watching my dad be just such a hard worker, it was cool. I mean, I didn't even know, but I knew he was a badass. I remember just going, he's so cool. He knows how to weld. He's strong. He's a tough man, and I loved all that stuff about my dad. So that really is what kind of inspired me. When I was little like that, my dad would have me clean the shop. And I remember one day I'm in the shop, I'm cleaning, sweeping the floor. And my job was to put the welders away, sweep the tables off. And he'd come in the shop and check on me once in a while. But I was in there pulling the plugs apart on a 220 welder. And in the process, I got my fingers caught in there. Okay, no gloves on. And I got seriously electrocuted by 220. I mean, it lit me up to the point where I had to go to the hospital. I mean, I was probably 8 or 9 years old back then. And that's just one of my moments that I'm like, this is what I want to do. I just felt like the electricity went through my body, and I felt like, this is it. This is so cool. At one point, I'm thinking I'm going to die from it. But at the next moment, I'm like, I'm living this. This is real life for me. After that event of being a little kid in this man's world, getting up in the morning and just, I remember getting up with my dad every morning, and this is when he smoked cigarettes. He'd light up a cigarette. I could smell that first light of the cigarette, and coffee in the morning. And it was just, I don't know, I can't explain it. It was like, it was so manly. You know what I mean? You just felt, it just was badass. I mean, I never got into smoking, thank goodness, but it just seemed like it was the thing to do back in those days. You know what I mean? But the story is so long. Like, even with my dad, when we would go and deliver steel. So what we would do is we'd actually fabricate the rebar and fabricate wrought iron gates, and we'd go and install them. This is when I was really little, and being in the work truck with my dad, it was cool. I'd show up these job sites and see how it's all working, how the construction world works, and then at one point, my dad got into actually buying ornamental iron accessories. So when you built the wrought iron gate or you built something, there was decorative aluminum pieces that would go into the wrought iron to kind of give it a real fancy look. It was basically a casting that was decorative. And so my dad was like, look, let's start buying this stuff. So we would get in an old F600 truck, probably a 1969, 1970, 2-ton, 2.5-ton truck, and drive from Vegas all the way down into Tijuana to pick up these castings. This is back in probably 1980, 1979. And I remember just spending those times in the front seat of my dad's truck, and we had no air conditioning. This would be in the middle of the summertime, 120 degrees in that truck. And then there was a hole in the floorboard where the shifter was that I remember would just blow the heat from the engine up into the front of the truck. So my dad, I remember he'd shove like an old flannel shirt down in there to kind of block off the heat. And then we had a 5-gallon bucket of ice water that sat in between me and my dad, and with towels in it. So when you get hot, you just dip that towel in there and just throw it on your head and cool you back down. And I don't know how many heat strokes I had. I mean, literally, I know that I had heat strokes in the front of that truck with him. And I remember falling asleep on his lap and wake up and have this huge wet spot on his leg from my head just sweating for all these miles. And I mean, you're driving back, coming up Baker Grade, 30 miles an hour, loaded down with a bunch of steel. And that was back before cell phones. I mean, if you broke down, you're broke down. You're just sitting there. So it was cool. I mean, that was a cool way to make a man out of you at a young age. I just remember just learning how to adapt to this world of being in it. You know what I mean? As time went on, my dad moved his steel company to another one. We were there for a while, I would say probably till about 85. We went from about 1980 to 85 in a different location. And then by 85, 86, we were moved into another location that actually became our big steel company. That's where it all really kind of began. I mean, I'd say by the time we moved in there, I was probably 14 years old. There was a lot of pressure on me, even at a young age, because my dad was so busy with growing a business that he didn't have time for all this broke down stuff. We had forklifts that would break. You got to think, we had shear lines in there that were cutting rebar. So you got metal cutting metal. What's going to happen? It's going to break. So there was nights that we would stay pretty much all night welding back a piece of machinery to make sure that it was ready to go for the next day when the guys show up at 4 a.m. to start cutting iron. There was a lot of construction going on with growing. So with the steel business, it was always growing. We always had to build racks. We had to build an awning to protect this steel. We had structural steel buildings going up, and it taught me how to put up a steel building, taught me how to build racks, taught me how to do almost anything that came with the welding world. I mean, if a forklift broke, say the front end broke off the front. I mean, there was times where the cross members would break off because of just all the heavy weight on them, and you'd have to crawl under there and weld them back together. My big claim for fame, probably with my dad in the steel industry, was we delivered a lot of rebar, a lot of structural steel around Las Vegas, probably back, for years. I mean, we did it for years. And my dad would go buy these old wore out U-Haul trucks. And the deal is we'd pull the U-Haul box off of it and put it in the back for storage units. And then my job was to build the flatbeds for it. And I want to think that started probably when I was about 16 years old. I think the first one I built was with my dad. And then from there on out, all the way up into my 30s, I was building flatbeds. And back then, we built them all with a stick welder. We didn't have a MIG welder. Matter of fact, I don't even know if I really knew what a MIG welder was, because all the welding that I ever learned to do was out in the field. Because my dad got out of the wrought iron business probably, I would say, into the early 80s, and then it was all just selling structural steel and selling rebar, but everything around it was out in the field. So there was no way to drag a wire feed welder out there and weld anything. So it was all stick welding. And I remember back then trying to learn how to weld properly. I never had anybody really show me how to weld. So what I would do is I would compare my welds with other welds that I would see. on something that was, like a lot of the old iron workers, I used to catch up with them and I'd be like, hey, come look at my weld and tell me what you think. Does this look right? Does this look like something that you would approve of if you've seen it on a job? And I remember this old iron worker named Clark. He was a pretty cool guy, really good structural hand, a good fabricator with a stick welder. I mean, this guy stick welded everything his whole life. And he would run a bead and then he'd be like, just try to weld like that. And I remember him telling me that. And throughout years of welding with a stick welder, I got good at it. I got to where I could stick weld a whole flatbed together. I got down to where I could use really thin, like 332 rod and weld back thin tubing for different projects. Later on, after I've done that forever and learned how to weld with a stick welder, I talked my dad into buying a MIG welder because I was like, man, these are so much easier to work with. So I would say probably by the late 80s, early 90s, my dad went down and bought a MIG welder. And I wanted to bring it in the shop. I cleared me out an area. I made basically my own fab shop at Economy Steel. 4 things. So then I started building all these racks for my dad to put different pallets in. So these pallet racks were for a lot of different varieties of material that we'd get in for concrete accessories. And so I built these racks. And I remember that's really where I started to MIG weld and get good at it. And back then I don't even know if I think I had a chop saw. So everything was done with a chop saw. And I didn't know much about like cleaning my welds up. So I just butt them together and just start welding them. So I think that's really where I started to learn how to MIG weld and measure with a tape measure and get things right, because you wanted those to be square. You wanted them to be flat on the ground. So when they're sitting there, they're not rickety, because they were 3 tiers. There was a bottom tier, a middle tier, and a top tier for 3 different pallets. And you didn't want them to be crooked. You didn't want them to be weak. I mean, we were probably throwing, I would say, anywhere from 8 to 10,000 pounds in a rack. I mean, so they were made out of 2-inch, 120 wall square tube. And that really is what kicked me off on learning how to do some production welding. And in production is where you really make the money. Artwork's fun and you do make money with it. Production, you can make seriously some money at it. So over those years of being in the steel yard and learning how to weld and fabricate, in about probably, I would say, the mid 90s, the early to mid 90s, I started my own welding business on building wrought iron. So my dad started off with wrought iron. I learned all these skills. By the time I was in my early 20s, I decided I like motorcycles, I like lifted trucks, I like big blocks in small trucks, I like boats, I liked everything that had a motor in it. But it costs money. I mean, it costs money to do this stuff. So I decided what I would do is get into making some extra money, which is my side hustle. And let me tell you, I made a ton of money doing wrought iron and doing side jobs on the side. Whether it was building a flatbed for a guy or doing wrought iron fences, it could be anything really. But by that time, I was just really into my hot rods. And at that point, I really started picking up, believe it or not, I started doing a lot of team roping, and I had horses. And so then I started building corral panels and barns for people. And, to be able to keep myself in that industry of rodeo world, it took money. And, so I had horses and I had hot rods, and they're both expensive. And at that time, I probably had a couple of girlfriends too, and those are expensive too. So you got to make sure that you got enough money to spread it all out. But, at one point I was probably making, I would say, this is probably in the mid 90s, $1,500 to $2,500 a week on the side. I worked for my dad all day. I would go home and build wrought iron at night. and I made more money on my side hustle than I did working for my dad. So that's just to show you that there is a way of doing it, and you can make a lot of money at this trade. Later on, as I had my two kids, my two boys, I really had to step my game up. You know, as my kids, I remember when Chase was, when I found out that my ex-wife was pregnant with Chase, that's when I really started working. I think I worked 100 hours a week, nonstop, every day, because I just didn't know what to do. I was scared. I was like, oh man, kids I heard are expensive. So that's when I really turned on the heat, and I started WelderUp. So I would say probably by 01, 02 is when I started WelderUp. And WelderUp, basically, I was got into doing some production work for, this would be, 02. I was doing production work for a tractor company that actually built sod machines that would go out on a sod farm where they grew grass, and it would cut the grass, roll it up, put it on a pallet, and eject it off the back. It's a really complicated piece of machinery. But I got into that production work, and that production work really was good. I mean, I was probably doing, $10,000 to $20,000 a month in production welding, which for a two-guy shop, there was 1, 2, maybe 3. I had a kid that worked for me part-time, a full-time guy, and me, and we still probably knocked out $20,000 a month back in 2002 or 3, 4, doing this production work. And production work is always money. You make a lot of money at production. That was my bread and butter. Now, moving forward, I was doing production, but I still wanted to build these hot rods and rat rods. And that's when I really started getting into the rat rod world, building it. So I had my production job going, and then at night I would go in and start working on my rat rods. And it was just fun. It was like you do the serious work in the daytime, and then in the evening your buddy comes over, a couple of your friends, and you got this fab shop, you got all these tools, and you know how to weld, you got some skills. Now you're gonna put it to having fun with it and then enjoying it. And that's when I decided to take the diesel rat rod, for instance. I'd built a couple of rat rods before the diesel rat rod, but that's the one that really kind of put me on the map. And you got a little bit of mechanical skills from growing up around forklifts, tractors, and growing up in that world of old trucks and stuff with my old man. And then you get into taking a little bit of all your little bit of skills, and you start enjoying it by building things that you didn't think you could do. That's what was crazy. I mean, once the diesel rat rod was built, it blew everybody's mind because it had a diesel engine. It was heavily fabricated. It has a 9-inch rear end. It's all 4-linked in the rear. And I didn't know everything. I had to have help. I had to ask questions on how things work, because this welding world's huge. I mean, it's big. Like there's the car world, there's the construction world, there's the pipeline world, there's working on the big oil refineries. I mean, there's a lot of welding in this world. I mean, I'd say over 50% of our world is welding. These pipelines that transport oil from 1,000 miles north to here is all welded together. And those guys are making a killing. These pipeline weld guys, they go out there, they charge $150, $200 an hour as long as their truck is out there running, or if they just pull up on the job site, they're making money. I don't really know what the pipeliners are making anymore, but they make a lot of money. But I'm just saying, there's so many skills. Once you learn how to weld, you can do anything. And it shows. I mean, look at the stuff behind me. Look at the things that we've created. I mean, watching Vegas Rat Rods and WelderUp, I mean, it's nice to know that you have that skill. And going from my dad as being a core of what I wanted to be is now set to my kids. So Chase and Cash basically is kind of their life now. Now they can weld, they can fabricate, they can mechanic, they can do whatever they want now. And they're the next generation. So if you get anything out of this video and this class, it's teaching you how to be proud as a man or a woman and to accomplish something in your life. There's so many people that sit around for so many years of their life that don't accomplish nothing, and they feel like they've wasted time. Well, you haven't wasted your time. If you're 45 years old or 50 or you're 60 years old watching this, you can still accomplish things. You can still learn a trade. It's still fun to go out there and dink around in your shop and do stuff. I know that I'm gonna be doing it forever. I'm always gonna be out in my shop doing something, building something, having fun with it. And it's a trade that will never die because people don't wanna do it. You get burned, it's hot, it's tiring. You're laying upside down in something. There's a lot of things that people don't like, but to me, it makes me feel accomplished every day. It's a challenge. Every day is a challenge with this. How are we gonna make it work? That's what's fun about it. So if you get anything out of this video, I just want you guys to know that it's done me well in my life. I've accomplished a lot of things. I've been from welding as a young kid up to a grown adult now, and I've done it for all these years, and I've been all right. I've succeeded. And no matter what, if the world comes to an end today, you can still make money welding because no one wants to do it, So make sure that that you're positive about it, that you want to do it. I mean, even if it's something that you never knew that you wanted to do, it might be something that you want to do. I mean, you just got to get out there and try it. And like I said, it's made me who I am today. There's a lot more that I could put into this story. I've skipped over tons of stuff, but I really want you guys to start your own legacy in welding and learn the trade and feel accomplished as a human being. And that's number one. So thanks for listening to what I got to say. And there's going to be a lot of questions people have on experience. And, all I can say is the course is one thing. This course is going to get you started, but experience is what makes you. So remember, I could sit here and give you a textbook breakdown on how welding is, and it looks easy right here on this table. Everything's going to look real easy. And that's how I want it to look. I want you guys to get confident in where you're going and how you're starting. But the reality of it is you're gonna have slag run down the back of your neck. You're gonna be burning yourself. You're gonna be pinching your fingers. There's just upside down in a car trying to weld something. This is the basic. This is gonna teach you how to make a project, build something to build your confidence that you could take it to the next level. But there's a lot of courses that you can watch online that is basically on a table like this that is not reality. The reality is that you can take what I'm going to teach you on this table and learn how to do it upside down, up on a 60-foot pole, overhead, in a rainstorm, snowing outside. So I've been there. I've done all that. So just remember that this is the very basic of getting started, to teach you how metal works, to teach you how to fabricate a little bit right here so you can start stepping it up and taking it to the next level. And that's all I'm trying to do, and I'm glad that you guys are gonna watch this course, and we'll see you out there.